All right, hello everybody. We kicked those losers. Calm down and Stavros out of the commentary booth. It's now Kill2 and Angel Hun. We have we formed Voltron versus Dead Terrorist on the field in the quarterfinals of Alliance Tournament 8. For we formed Voltron on the left, we have 3 Drakes, an Oneros, 2 Hugins, 3 Purifiers, and a Kitsune.
And for the Dead Terrorists, we have 2 Macarials, 1 Proteus, 1 Damnation, 1 Hound, 2 Purifiers, and 2 Daredevils. Both teams falling back on the setups that you have seen earlier on in the day, both winning setups as they are obviously on the field. But let's see how they do. I believe the Voltron setup was an armor tanking, dampening Drake setup, whereas the Dead Terrorist team has an incredibly powerful logistics ship in that Proteus, it appears.
Yep. We are underway. Both teams pretty far apart. Came in at max on the beacon. That's going to be bad news for Dead Terrorists, in my opinion. Both teams able to do damage from range, but I think that Voltron's able to control and maintain that range better, and they probably have more damps, even though I imagine damps are being fielded by both teams.
I imagine damp superiority would go to Voltron, and overall actual electronic warfare superiority would most definitely go to Voltron, with those pair of Hugins able to control the speed of the Tackler Daredevils pretty effectively. I'd be surprised if a lot of damage came into the Voltron team initially.
And we're seeing something kind of interesting, something that's not super common in the tournament, especially in a setup that looks like the Dead Terrorist setup. They're basically saying, come and get us. They're not moving those Macarials across the field towards the Voltron team for right now. As you can see, the Macarials as well as the Damnation transfer and cap to that Logistics Proteus. So I guess they're just going to sit here and wait until Voltron moves a little closer. I don't think that'll really be a problem for Voltron, but it is a little interesting.
It's interesting that Proteus is particularly robust in its ability to tank. Its major limitation is that it doesn't get the traditional bonus of range that the logistics cruisers get. So it has to be relatively close to the targets that it needs to support. This does facilitate a cap transfer chain fairly well, but once they get out of position, or if those damps really hinder his targeting range, we could see a problem. At the moment, it doesn't look like the entire Voltron team is being damped out. I see at least the Drakes firing at the moment. I believe Dead Terrorists choosing to attempt to neutralize the effectiveness of those bombers.
Yeah, the Drakes throwing heavy missiles down there. They're the only ones in range for now, I guess. They're shooting at a Daredevil and at this Hound now, but not able to really do too much with the logistics there. Hound taking a lot of damage actually, but repped back. It took a second for the Proteus to switch over his reps. One thing that might be really effective for Voltron right here would be bombs. Having those Daredevils still clinging to the center of that logistics chain and having some drones out there to repair whoever's taking damage, the bombs could be pretty effective.
I think they're waiting for the tanks to be a little more stressed on the Dead Terrorist side, so that they have to put more drones out, and immediately one of the Voltron Purifiers gets 2 volleyed seemingly by those Macarials.
That was
an incredible amount of damage coming on there. That's what happens when the ECM when the electronic warfare fails. Those damps, once you get a lock, if they're using lock time scripts, or once they're in range, they're able to put the full damage on them. I'd be surprised if there are any tracking disruptors on this team, which really would have helped to negate the damage of those Macarials.
That was freaking crazy. I can't believe that, I don't know, I guess maybe because they're running all these damps, there's no way to tell for sure who has range on your ships. So if they have the damps spread out and didn't realize that they had ships within pretty close range of those Macarials, with the Macarials having a lock, they just didn't realize what was possible. And that was actually an instance where Alpha played a huge role, as you can see now. Them trying to break the second Purifier, and he's not going down. The Oneros having an easy time keeping him up. So I don't know if that's because this Purifier is far enough away that only one Macarial has a lock, but that definitely that first one, both were able to get a volley off.
It may have been just a piloting error by that first Purifier pilot. At the moment, we're not seeing a ton of damage going on into the Voltron team. It would be interesting to see whether the Dead Terrorists are even wielding bombs at this point. Perhaps really only keeping bombs in their bays to thin the field of logistics drones, which actually would be a fairly effective tactic. We're seeing damage spread out pretty evenly amongst the Dead Terrorist team. Latelia Denham in that Proteus, as he's been almost the entire time throughout this tournament, doing a fantastic job of keeping his team repped up with negligible amounts of damage, even showing up on our overviews.
Really, Voltron doing the same thing here as Dead Terrorist, keeping all their ships tight. I feel like less experienced teams, or I don't know, teams in a different sort of setup, you would see this Kitsune, for instance, and the Daredevils busy doing things separate from the main part of the team. But with Damps playing such a huge role in the tournament and this match in particular, it's really important that everyone hugs the logistics ships extremely closely so that they're able to receive reps when they need them and don't have to come running back because the logistics aren't able to lock.
It's interesting to note that the teams are about 30, on general, are about 30 to 40 kilometers apart, most of them within the 30-kilometer range. So it would be pretty reasonable to assume that almost all the dampers will be fitting targeting range scripts rather than targeting lock time scripts.
Oh, was there bombs there? I saw some drones explode. I don't know if that was because of a bomb or not, but I was looking at this Hugin who was taking damage for Voltron, and he was actually doing... It looks like they're targeting the bombs, the Drakes and bombers shooting at drones down there. Targeting the bombs, targeting the drones. It
does look like that. We've seen that strategy be fairly effective before when teams were unable to break the tanks, just being too strong as those logistics ships compounded by those drones. We have seen teams do that and be very effective at it. I believe CVA did that, and to great effect.
I don't remember.
Yeah.
Honestly, I don't think the drone's going to make a really big difference in this match. I guess it's... Like I said earlier from the desk, it's something that you can kill, so it's not a bad option. But really, the Dead Terrorist team not really depending on drones. There goes the Dead Terrorist Hound taking tons of damage. Proteus pilot got to get switched over quick and can't do it, so we lose a bomber on that side now as well, evened up the field. Earlier I was talking about a Hugin that had taken some damage on the Voltron side, and he was doing exactly what I mentioned, getting away from his logistics pilot, who no doubt can't lock at a really long range, and so he had to come back, but now he's obviously in safe range. Actually, he only took some shield damage, so really not a big deal.
He did only seem to take some shield damage, perhaps really from those bombers. I'd imagine the Machariels at this point aren't firing that often. Haven't seen a whole lot of fire coming to him.
And now shooting a Daredevil, putting a lot of damage on the Daredevil. This is hard work for the Proteus pilot. He's got to switch quick. They may even wait until Kitsune has a jam and then grab one of these frags, and there goes a Daredevil. So now the advantage in Voltron's favor in terms of points destroyed.
Advantage to Voltron, but while Latelia Dunham now has less ships to manage on the field, and he has proven extremely effective as a logistics pilot, so he's able to deal with a much tighter team. Not really an impressive amount of DPS coming out of the Dead Terrorists, however. They really do need to at least take out one of the bombers to even up to take the advantage in this match.
One thing I was talking about between matches is the second Daredevil starting to take a lot of damage on the Dead Terrorist team. I was talking actually with a CCP guy about kind of what you bring into a match to deal with certain sorts of ECM setups. That Daredevil's still hurting. He is getting logistics, so he may pull back as he gets back to the middle of that group there. But, you can see these Machariels for Dead Terrorists have fielded ECCMs. They even have tracking computers. So there's a big gamble in fielding defensive EWAR stuff that you're going to field something you don't need. There's really no need for these ECCMs or the tracking computers in this particular match. You get some extra range out of them. They never hurt, I guess, the tracking computers in particular, but obviously sensor boosters would have been really nice to have for Dead Terrorists in this match.
Absolutely, and I think sensor boosters would have been a pretty reasonable bet for a fit at this late into the match with the pattern of Damps being comboed with ECM quite often. Getting that first lock and at least being able to get that first wave of drones out and onto a focused target could be fairly effective, especially on carries or Kitsune.
This is a really tough spot for Dead Terrorists to be in. They really cannot lock anything on the Voltron side right now. There's a solid 30 kilometers, 20 kilometers between the two teams, which is enough for most Dead Terrorists to be damped down to such a short range that they really cannot do anything from where they're at. But if they try to move across the field, the Hugins will split them up, making it impossible for them to really do any damage at all. And Hugins can keep whatever is closest away, and Voltron can move just as easily as Dead Terrorists can, actually.
It's a really interesting strategy that Voltron is employing here. They actually have, at the moment, one dampening ship for each of the damage dealers, and the Hugin's able to control any ships that may or may not be dampened, and also compensating for ships that are able to get in range, or perhaps not being able to get to lock from that Kitsune. So it's an interesting cohesive strategy here, and the Armor Drake really not something you see that often, but it's interesting with a traditionally shield tank ship. The mid slots are really much more open now that they've shifted the tank one slot lower.
Yeah, I think actually an Armor Drake is one of the most viable configurations in the Alliance tournament. It has been. Because it has so many mids. It can do damage from far away, so it can make use of the mids for E-War and still give you some damage, which is something that a lot of ships can't do. They're either short range, so they have the mids, but they got to be closer to do damage, or they don't have the mids available. Yeah, so now Voltron switching over to an actual primary working on that Proteus. They've killed tons of drones, so there's not a lot of rep available for him. I don't know what his local tank is like, but he is going down at half armor now.
It looks like Voltron seems to be shooting while neuting. No, sorry, those are energy transfers going to Latalia Dunham in the Proteus. We are seeing a large number of EM type damage going into the Proteus right now. We're seeing EM torpedoes and EM heavy missiles from those Purifiers and Drakes respectively. An interesting decision against an armor tanking ship. Generally, they are weakest against, I believe, explosive damage, where EM would be one of their highest resistances. It's an interesting decision to make as far as damage types.
This Proteus still going down. Dead Terrorist without any other option, killing off the offensive drones, the damage drones coming from the Voltron side that are on that Proteus, but really there's only a few of those that shouldn't really contribute too much to the overall DPS, so if he was going to break, he'll probably break anyway. Since you mentioned damage types, I would like to say that in my entire PvP career, and maybe, I don't know, I'm interested in a debate around this, but I don't think damage types are very important as a topic in PvP. I think that almost everybody sets up for kind of an omni-resist tank, and damage types really only become important when your ship has a bonus for a certain one. I think it's kind of an over-emphasized aspect of PvP, and I would encourage new PvPers not to worry about it too much.
I agree with you there. However, some Caldari ships, like the Nighthawks, are really concentrated around kinetic damage, so you'll see that kinetic damage may be filled a hole in, may have a hole in some ships, especially Matari T2, which you see quite a lot of. It's interesting. I don't really change damage types when I look at a ship unless I'm solo, and really only in an autocannon type ship when I need to choose my range.
So there goes that Proteus. Logistics down for Dead Terrorists. They obviously, I mean, they need that ship. Logistics are important in any setup, but more importantly, this is just proving that there's really no option for Dead Terrorists here. Voltron have a strong strategic hold on the match, and they are going to be able to break the Dead Terrorist team without logistics there. Now the rest of the ships will start falling pretty quickly.
I don't believe any of the Dead Terrorist team has been able to get within 25 kilometers of any single pilot of the Voltron team. Really impressive control by those Hugins, piloted by Minigan and Heyu. Really not something I'd expect out of either one of them, but an impressive performance nonetheless. We have lost an additional Purifier from Dead Terrorists. I don't think there is enough damage on the field with the dampeners now being able to focus almost at a 2-to-1 advantage now.
Yeah, I would say that actually, I mean, you could have had terrible pilots in the Hugins, and I don't think it would have made any difference because their presence alone was enough to restrict Dead Terrorists' ability to act. They know what's going to happen if they make an attempt, and they never really made an attempt. They never tried to get across the field because they knew that that would actually hurt their chances. I mean, really, from the start, from as soon as we got into this situation where we're at right now, Voltron has had control, and Dead Terrorists, to me, have looked like a team that gave up. They didn't have, not out of lack of spirit or
they certainly gave
courage,
it a good shot,
but they really just didn't have an option. It was a situation where they were pinned and couldn't do anything.
I mean, I absolutely applaud Dead Terrorists for employing their honor, not letting CCP Claw get to them or running out of the match. But they were, as far as setups go, the Voltron setup just had far more control over this arena. Being able to control maneuverability, being able to focus damage at a will, with logistics support, having various different types of damage options at any given point. being able to switch targets and being able to confuse a logistic pilot, especially with the volley damage being delayed. It was an interesting tactic, and I'm not sure if this is an original theory as far as tournament teams go, but it's definitely something I'd like to see again.
So now we're losing the first battleship for Dead Terrorists, 2 of those, and then a Damnation. It'll take a couple minutes for them to wear through it, but you know, I've talked about during the studio segment Voltron being a team that needs to execute, that's going to be their big problem because their setups are strong, but they need to use them effectively, and maybe this match wasn't the ultimate test for that, but in my mind they definitely said something here with this performance. They didn't make any mistakes, and they definitely had an opportunity to. I think the Dead Terrorist setup was strong as well, but Voltron's probably better, but definitely they did a good enough job wielding it here that some of my concerns about their ability to execute may be alleviated.
Well, what do you think actually counters this setup from Voltron?
Oh, I don't think it's too weird. Anything that operates at range and can cope with the damps. I think that something like PL's ECM setup would probably do really well. I think that something even weird, something that was able, you know, this range we're at right now, or even something with sensor boosters. For some reason, a Drake going down, talking about ability to execute, I don't know what he's doing.
They're probably shooting him. Shinma Apollo's pretty terrible. I'd shoot him too.
He's still sitting with the rest of the ships. He's now receiving logistics. I don't know how it was possible for him to take any damage. Maybe they're just screwing around. But it doesn't matter. The Macariel's at half armor and still dropping.
I mean, they're sort of a lulz team. Or they started out as a lulz team, disbanded right before the tournament, and barely made it in. It's an interesting that you'd say execution is really a major component in them doing well. I like it a lot. It's very solid.
I like there's a lot of local banter now, and one thing I saw that I like is Voltron saying, "We're coming for you, Hydra." So these guys definitely gunning for Hydra. They know what they got to do. And we said going in that Voltron had a tough bracket, if nothing else. I mean, this bracket was so stacked with good teams, and so far so good for them.
I think now what we're going to see is Voltron taking the time to loot while slowly whittling away at that Damnation. Damnation, usually one of the last ships on the field. It's not very effective without a team around it. Very little damage potential. Only there for its bonuses. A robust tank, but really to no end.
Yeah, definitely. A ship that we often see left over at the end of matches, and that's fine. I don't know, with the value of the armor bonuses is maybe something you could dispute, but I think in this setup it's stronger than in other setups we've seen it fielded in. Obviously, the giving the Proteus really just enhancing the armor tank the whole team is definitely something that has value. Whether or not it's worth the points, I think you could argue about, but the setup's done. I think it's a good setup. I don't think it's terrible to bring the Damnation.
It's a decent setup. It's definitely just not the ship I would choose at this point. I believe that it's interesting. The Voltron setup is actually sort of similar to the Hydra setup in that it's based heavily around damps controlling range of your opponent. You've got a triple battlecruiser heavy top as your DPS, and then you have obviously the single logistics and an ECM ship. I'd really like to see those two setups go against each other.
Yeah,
I have a feeling it will change.
It'll be really interesting to see if Hydra brings the Merms back in their damp ECM setup against this. I would be really curious to see the way that would go. Definitely a match that would be cited in an E-War battle that would be hard to see early in the match. But it would be really cool. That would be a really interesting face-off.
That's a match that would come down to execution for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So Damnation down. Good job. We form Voltron. We will see you in the semis, and we'll go back to Soundwave.